England. And from there, if you'll bring me up to today, how you are living in San Jose, California.
Okay, so we'll perhaps make some big jumps, if it's all right with you. When I landed in England, I was part of a group, perhaps 200 boys. There were fewer girls than boys, somehow, much fewer, because if any boys survived, then they must have survived for the same reason as I. They must have done something. Because the very first people who were immediately liquidated, say those who came to Auschwitz with Birkenau, the minute they stepped off the train, as you said, they were selected. And especially young children with their mothers. They were never given a number. They were burned straight away. So the only people who sort of survived were people who roughly did what I did. By sheer chance, it was really chance that you managed to do something that was of some use to the German machinery. So in England, most of the other boys we call them boys, even though officially we were all 15. In practice we were between 15 and 18. And the reason why weren't there any younger children? Because of the reasons I just stated. It would have been impossible for them to survive. They could not pretend they are adults. And they could not carry out the physical work which they had to do if they were small. And within a few weeks after arriving in England, in that special place, looked by a special British Jewish Refugees Committee, because they paid and they get all the paperwork and permission to bring us across, I fell ill again, same kind of sickness or illness which I experienced in May, during the liberation of the Dresdenstadt. And I happen to have here a letter written in October of 1945 from a so-called Westmoreland sanatorium. Now in England the sanatorium is not a mental institution, but rather a place where you treat people with illnesses like TB. And this letter is addressed to my brother in Paris. And it says here that, is it all right for me to read it out?
Yes, please.
It's addressed Charles Sosnowitz, 14 Rue Barbette, Paris 3, dated 21st October 1945, and says, "Dear Sir, in reply to your inquiry, I would state that your brother, Meyer Sosnowitz, was admitted here on the 10th of September 1945, suffering from acute pleurisy." In parentheses it says right, with effusion. The temperature soon settled and he has made steady progress. The fluid on the right side has almost cleared, but the X-ray examination shows a good deal of lung infiltration to be present. His general condition is good now and he feels well, but will need quite a long spell of care. I am at present not sure of what future arrangements are likely to be, but this is in the hands of the Jewish Refugee Committee in London. Yours faithfully, Medical Superintendent, Counter Tuberculosis Officer. So that perhaps brings me to another point you asked earlier. When we were still in Dresdenstadt and the war was over, there really wasn't much to do. People were just congregating in groups and talking, and I remember people were coming from, the Zionists from Israel, and they were encouraging, asking people to sort of sign up and go to Palestine. then some other people from other countries sort of came. But I said I didn't sort of go to these places too much because I was sick, not well. But everybody had to move. There was sort of nothing to do. The Dresdenstadt, or even Prague, just became a transit place. Coming back to this sanatorium thing, I was diagnosed as having TB, but at that time, in 1945, there weren't any of these new medicines that we do have now, and the only treatment for TB at that time was just rest. And so, but fortunately, my case wasn't all that bad, because I was in company with some other boys who had a similar thing, and they really had it much worse. So much so that a part of the lung had to be removed by surgery, or sort of the lung collapsed. But I had to take it easy, and this sanatorium, somehow I was taken together with two other boys to a different sanatorium closer to London, and then we stayed there for about half a year or a year. And then the Jewish Refugee Committee, who really looked after us and paid for that, found it more convenient, or perhaps less expensive, to create a hostel, a sort of a special place where we could be resting there and be under the supervision of a visiting doctor. And so this was in a place called Queer Meat. That was the title of that big mansion house, which was turned into kind of like a hospital. And we just, most of us recuperated and regained our health. And as soon as a person regained the health, they started looking around to see what they could do. Now, in my particular case, I was persuaded by someone, I believe it was a rabbi, to try and, rather than going for business or trade, they encouraged me to study, to go to school. But of course, being sick, I couldn't go to school. So I started studying by a so-called correspondence course, where everything was done by mail. They send you lessons and you go back, and it's quite a bit of self-study. And then there was a resident teacher in that convalescent home who taught us English and a few other things. And so this private study enabled me to pass the first examination, sort of join the academic world by taking a so-called a matriculation exam. And from this I did some other study. By that time I was already well to go to a place about perhaps about 30 or 40 miles away from that convalescent home, and attend a school and study some scientific subject that enabled me to take what is equivalent here to a high school diploma. And then some further studies in another school enabled me to get a degree in physics. So the degree in physics was in 1952, and that was roughly the end of my study. That was a bachelor's degree in physics, so it sort of took me like from 7 years. But of course the first 2 or 3 were sort of included the period of physical health recovery. And also I had to make up a lot of ground because I didn't go to any of the elementary schools or high schools.
With whom were you living in England?
By myself. I didn't have anybody to live with.
How did you support yourself? Or did the Jewish Federation provide funds?
Jewish communicators. It was, the amount given was not very great, but it was sufficient to stay alive.
You mentioned that your brother had that letter, so he must have been looking for you after the war.
I was going to say that whilst we were in Dresdenstadt, we left for England middle of August 14. So in July and in June, when the war was already over and various people were discussing and seeing where they want to go, we somehow asked or encouraged or requested or something to make contacts with our relatives, kind of thing, to write. So wondering, they asked, do you know of anybody, an uncle in America or in England, or this? I did not know anybody, but I did remember my brother's address in Paris. So I wrote something on a piece of paper without any stamps because we didn't have any money or anything. And I think an American soldier, or was it a Russian soldier, they collected all these little letters or contacts from other people in my similar position. And my brother was very surprised, happily so, that he heard from him.
And your sister?
Right, and then by sheer, not coincidence, but my sister did exactly the same thing. So I was not in contact with my sister because I didn't know where she was. I didn't know whether she was alive. But she contacted my brother in Paris too. So he was the contact point, center point. So when he started writing to me, he told me that he heard from my sister. Now my sister was liberated in Bergen-Belsen. And what can I say? She was telling me that the last year and a half, she lived as a Christian. She pretended to be non-Jewish, but and this enabled her to be on the other side of the Warsaw Ghetto when the ghetto was liquidated, or perhaps she may have even left just before it was liquidated. And again, this must have been by arrangement of our parents with the old clients or friends or something like that. But then she was telling me, and I just read something written there this morning, that she was caught on the street of Warsaw when there was some sort of a revolt in Warsaw by the Poles. And as a punishment, they caught people off the street. And my sister happened to be one of them, so she was caught together with other Polish people, and she was treated as a Pole in the various camps. She was in Ravensburg and in another camp, but and again she was moved.
She was treated as a Polish Christian.
As a Polish Christian, yeah. Under an assumed name, and I've got the name here somewhere.
Why would they arrest a Polish Christian?
Well, the Poles were, that was a reprisal for the revolt, for the Polish revolt. Oh. So otherwise my sister would have possibly been able to survive living in Warsaw under the assumed name in that little place she lived with a family or something like that, if it hadn't been for this, and assuming that she wouldn't have been betrayed, by somebody finding out about her. So...
but she was not betrayed to the extent where somebody reported her as a secret Jew.
No. She managed to the very end to go as a non-Jewish person.
And your brother in Paris, how did he survive?
He too had to run away from Paris to the unoccupied part, this Vichy, and he too, believe it or not, had to pretend he's not Jewish. So it was quite an art, because it's not easy to find out when you begin to talk and inquire. If people ask you about the Christmas and this, or your name or your family, you had to have pretty quick, good answers. And even in France, if a fellow Frenchman were to know that you were really pretending to be non-Jewish, they would have possibly given you away too. But the Poles, definitely.
Did your sister speak to you in any extent of the conditions relative to your parents and your brother?
No, she did not want to say. She did mention once that when I asked what happened to my father, I think my mother was the first one to go. And then I think the people from Warsaw Ghetto too had to work for some German outfit, making brushes or uniforms or shoes, something for the military. Not in their home, but again in sort of specially allocated places. And those who managed to be in those places were sort of already the privileged people, because they had sort of a little chance of survival. Now those who did not go, as you know from the historical description, and I don't have to tell you that because it's pretty well recorded, but the people in charge of the Warsaw Ghetto had to deliver a certain number of people every day, to fill up the shipment. And the people had, those that were taken onto the trains were taken to Treblinka, which was a crematorium, 100%. It was not even like an Auschwitz. It just, people went straight from the train to the death within a few minutes of arrival. And that's pretty well documented in this movie Shoah, if you have seen it.
Yes.
So all the people who went to Treblinka, and it was a shipment, there had to be an assignment, there had to be a delivery, like of, I don't know, 10,000 people there, whatever. And they had to be the people, inhabitants from Warsaw. So I don't know how, but so my sister told me that once she was together with my father, and some people, whether they're the Jewish capos or some German or some Polish police, they just came and snatched my father away, and she never saw him again.
So your mother and father were transported to Treblinka.
Yeah. Most
and
likely.
your brother?
Must have done too.
So you do not know if he, your brother, might have taken part in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising?
No, I'm not sure about that. But I do know one thing, and that is that we had a family and living on the same street, Zamenhof, and that this cousin did. And in fact, as far as I know, he's the only person which I know that has been in the uprising and is still alive today.
You have spoken to him?
Yeah,
Did he have any knowledge of your brother?
no. No. None of the people want to talk.
After you got your degree in physics in England, what happened next then in your life? Were you an observant Jew at that time? Were you a Shomer Shabbos?
Possibly at that time, not all that much. But the convalescent home that was established by the Jewish Refugee Committee was run on an Orthodox line. Not all that much. And then when I studied, it was out of town school. I had to find lodgings with family, a non-Jewish family, as a lodger, you know. And the food they gave me was not kosher. But it so happens that in 1952, that's when I became independent financially. You know, it was quite a drain or strain, a financial, on the Jewish Refugee Committee to support people like myself, other people who did not study, many and who were healthy. But not everybody came having TB or being sick. And those people find employment much earlier, perhaps as early as 48, 49. And this committee with limited resources was only too willing, you know, was only too happy to see that people were able to stand on their own feet. And there weren't actually all that many people that entered the academic world.
What did you do after you got your degree in physics? Did you teach or did you have a job?
I worked for industry in England. And I've been working ever since. So really, this coming year, 1992, will be 40 years. But I did continue with my studies, part-time at first. And then I sort of could regard it as a leave of absence from work, but I combined work and study together. So I was able to get 2 other degrees in physics. And 2 years after starting work, meaning in 1954, I married. And my wife is over there. And
tell us your wife's full name or maiden name.
Maiden name is Minden, Ruth Minden. And Ruth has also got a little history to say, but not quite in the same line as mine. She was born in Hamburg, Germany, but they left Germany in 1938 and came to England. So they lived in England, in London, throughout the war. And I met Ruth in this convalescent home, which I mentioned to you, that the Jewish Refugee Committee established. So that's where people recovered from the illness. Instead of staying in a expensive hospital, they had a resident nurse and doctors, visiting doctors. And as soon as the sort of sick boys were able to leave that place, they were encouraged to look around and select a trade and do something and become independent.
When were your children born? And please give me the names of all of your children.
Right, in 56, the first one, Julius, Rachel, Novice. Now, I was going to say that 5 years after being in England, that is in 1951, it's just 6 years, I became a naturalized British subject. And also at that time I could see that for more than one reason that this name, Sosnovitz, was... I did not want to impart it on the rest of my family. For one thing, when I was going to school with this name and they asked me, oh, you come from Paul, they immediately took me as a Pole, you know. And historically, I'm not sure you know, that there was such a thing as a Polish army fighting with the British or something. And they tried to say, oh, well, you're sort of brave people, you were fighting and all the rest. I did not want to be associated as a Pole. When I lived in Poland, not only I, but we Jews as a whole, were never Poles, by the Polish people. And so I did not see any reason why I should carry the name Sosnovitz and be associated with Poles when I did not have the desire to have anything to do with them. In fact, I didn't know Polish at one time. As I described, when I escaped from Warsaw Ghetto, I had to know it, or else I would have been caught straight away. Similarly, my sister, who pretended to be Christian, she too must have been speaking a good Polish. But as soon as the war ended, I stopped speaking Polish and I never uttered another word, really. And I don't know it now. This is just because of my feeling to Poland as a country and to Polish people as a nation. And I blame them more than I blame the Germans for everything that happened to the Jewish people. So in 1951 I became a British subject, and also I changed my name at that time. In 1954, as I said, I married. 1956 we had our first daughter, Judith Rachel, and 4 years later, in 1960, another daughter, Miriam Hillary, and 2 years later, 1962, our last child, a son, called David Jeremy. And around about 1962, which means I've already worked 10 years, from 52 to 62 in industry in England. Companies like English Electric, comparable to a company like here, like General Electric. And I was also able to get a master's degree and a PhD degree. And at that time, the economy here in this country, what was President Kennedy taking over, and the economy was booming. The object was to put a man on the moon with the outer space work, and this country needed some scientists, and in England the job opportunities weren't all that great. They must have been perhaps similar to what you see now. So people from American companies were recruiting in England. So I answered an advertisement which I saw in the Sunday paper, and the recruiters were from a company called Westinghouse. And so the company interviewed me there in England, that they could see my qualification, and they arranged for the whole family to come in 1964. At that time, the youngest was just 1.5 years old. And having arrived there in upstate New York in a place called Elmira, that's where the Westinghouse electron tube division was, we stayed there for 12 years until 1975. Well, from 1964 to 1975, when family came over in 1976. And in 1975 I took another job here in a similar line.
Here
in this, so to say, Silicon Valley. Yeah. And I continue working in my, so to say, profession.
Have you ever returned to Poland?
No. I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole.
Have you been to Germany?
No. No, no.
Have you been back to Europe?
When I
Other
was
than
in
New York.
England, and especially as a student, before I started working, so it was 1950, 1951, I visited my brother in Paris. He was, as I said, 15 years older than I was. He got married in 47, or was it 46? So I did go to Europe, but the only place was Paris, France. Roughly, that's when I spent my summer vacation. And my sister, when she was liberated from Bergen-Belsen, she too was sort of too old to go to England, being 2 years old there. So she stayed in Germany for a little while, and must have been, I think, January of 48, when Israel was still Palestine under the British. She had a special permit which she obtained in Germany. There was a quota allowing her to enter Palestine. So she lived in Israel, in Tel Aviv, for many years. And then just coincidentally, as we left England in 1964, here for better financial opportunity in this country, my sister left Israel and she went to Canada. And the reason why she went to Canada is because my cousin, I mentioned earlier, who traveled with me, so to say, throughout the whole war, he too was older than I was, so he couldn't come to England, so he stayed in Germany and did some sort of business, selling this, that and the other, but eventually he went to Toronto, Canada. And he helped my sister leave Israel and go to Canada and reside in Canada. Now, as it happens, my sister passed away a few years ago due to cancer. So she died a natural death at the age of 60, could be 62. But my cousin still lives there in Toronto. And one of the reasons why she left Israel I think she was emotionally a little bit more upset than I was. And her son just reached the age, or would have been reaching the age when he would have to enroll to the army. So it was either to leave Israel at that time, when the son was about 15, or stay on longer and not be able to leave because the son would have had to go in the army. And so tying up a few things, there isn't really all that much really to say. My sister happened to unexpectedly to have got cancer, and it was in a place where it couldn't be done too much.
What was your sister's married name?
Right. Her married name in the end was Melnick. She married someone she met in Germany before leaving for Palestine, and he too went through camps, and he had big stories to say. And strangely enough, as regard to this changing of name, his name was Khmelnytsky. Now, if you read the history, Khmelnytsky was one of the biggest anti-Semites in Russia, who arranged all the pogroms.
Yes, the Khmelnytsky massacres.
Khmelnytsky massacres, and how a Jewish family living in Lodz, which was a big town not far from Warsaw in Poland, could have had a name like Khmelnytsky. First of all, the association with the real Khmelnytsky, who arranged all the pogroms, this in itself was already bad enough. But then the writing and the spelling of this name was something terrible, and yet they carried on with this name for many years, possibly about 25, 30 years.
And then changed it to Melnik.
They changed, they again sort of, it's like a connection with this Melnik. So.
You mentioned one son by that marriage. Was that the only child by that marriage?
No, he had a sister, and they're both living now in Toronto. Yeah. And the sister was named Batya, that after my mother.
Do you see your niece and nephew occasionally?
Yeah, that's all. And my own children, I sort of in touch with them too. Yeah.
And your cousin in Toronto, who went with you through the entire period, do you see him occasionally?
Occasionally, right? Occasionally. Yeah, he's quite a successful businessman in textiles. Yeah.
For what reason did you feel you never wanted to go back to Warsaw? The memories were so poor.
It's the people and the language would put me off. And the memories. Warsaw used to be a nice place. 1 million Jews out of 3 million inhabitants. And there's nothing there now. And people who did travel, they tell me that even now, with no Jews at all, there's anti-Semitism. So who needs it?
How did your experience in the camps in Poland affect your life now?
I don't know, that's a difficult question to answer, really. There was it's no doubt that it was obviously a powerful lesson in life. But I think that I know that there's people who have gone through the camps and they're roughly the same as I. They can only live now by continually talking about it, you know. That's their medicine kind of thing. This is what they need to survive. And very frequently they are sort of in touch with other people with similar experience, and they've come a little group, they speak the language, they know what it was, and they've got a tie, you know, something common. Now by contrast, I somehow found a different way around it, and that is to get involved in work and studies and not to think about it.
Have you spoken of this before?
No, no.
This is the first time since...
No, I sort of occasionally sort of tell people, my wife, what it was like, but not continuously, but and in particular I had to train myself, really force myself to block these things out of my mind when I had to study. Because for studying, unlike doing some manual work or trade, you can sort of be a little bit, have something on your mind and yet be able to carry on with whatever you do. But for studying and hard studying, if you had something on your mind, it was just impossible to concentrate and do the studying. And of course I had to do like accelerated studying to cover ground, you know, which would take 2 or 3 years to do it in just a few months. So I found it possible just to carry on with life, but not recalling these things. But it doesn't mean one forgets. It's just not to dwell on it.
I have one more question and then I'll ask my colleague. In 1941, you would have been 13 years old. And you did not mention if you were bar mitzvah in Warsaw.
I was.
Can you tell me about your bar mitzvah in Warsaw?
Well, it was a small private bar mitzvah. And people were still able to carry on with the private religious life as if they chose to do that. And people did do that. So I did have bar mitzvah. The first year or so was not bad at all. I mean, from being able to make some sort of a living and meeting the non-Christian people. But things at some point in time started going downhill, and they went very, very rapidly. So it was sort of not a gradual deterioration. It was sort of went bad and then the end very rapidly.
Sheila?
Ms. Novice, have your children ever asked you anything about your experience? Have you ever told them of your experience?
Yeah, they ask, but I sort of try and get out of it.
Why do you think so?
I don't think I can really tell them what they don't already know from the general books, you know, and things like that. Especially also, sort of my age was such that I wasn't quite a little child not to know anything. On the other hand, I wasn't grown up to know real things. So, for instance, if you were to ask me what happened to Warsaw Ghetto, the books that describe, you know, a diary was kept by the leaders of Warsaw Ghetto, day by day, minute by minute, what was happening. You familiar with that?
No.
Which diary?
Women kept
Of the, I forget the name. This was the way the Germans usually operated, and that is they asked the Jews to do the dirty job for them. So they selected the Judenrat or something,
Oh, yes.
and they formed the Jewish police, and whatever they wanted to do, they asked they do it through them. And books are available as to what happened in Warsaw. Now, such books, you know, written by scholars who sort of could study and making use of the fact that the head of that Jewish committee kept a diary and described. This can describe things that happened in Warsaw much better than I, who was there. But because of the age and because of the preoccupation of just staying alive, I didn't have the overall view. So this was the reason why I somehow felt that the children can learn by reading the books and hearing and films and whatever. But then again, I somehow didn't. I could not talk about it.
Has your experience been seminal in maintaining your life as an observant Jew, or were the two totally unrelated?
Possibly I could say that if it hadn't been for the fact that I married my wife Ruth, who is or was religious or from birth, that I could have possibly ended up not being what I am. This being so, because if I was in any group of other people with similar experiences, most of them somehow could not be religious on account of what they've seen happening, even though they came from religious homes. And to a lot of people, this Holocaust was sort of like an indication that is, I'm sort of like, don't even want to say the words that there's no God really. This is the kind of thing, and that there's just nothing behind it. And yet other people, of course, don't believe in that, and they feel that the Holocaust was really a part and parcel of the great plan of the Almighty, even though we don't quite know why, but we don't know why in many other respects, other things. So this is perhaps what I would answer to your question as to how I came to be religious now. So it wasn't that I came at a cross point where I had to decide whether to be or not to be. Had I met a wife who would have been thinking differently, I would have gone the other way.
Sheila?
I don't have any other questions.
We both thank you for giving us this great honor in speaking to us. We regret having brought you any pain in our discussions. I do state that your experiences here will add enormously to our treasure of the experiences of other Holocaust survivors, many of whom have told us similar stories. But we both thank you very much.
Thank you, and of course I did it mainly not to tell stories. If I feel that my telling will help anybody in any way, then I feel I've done my part. Well, thank you for doing your job.
Thank you. Thank you, Dick.